Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Before we get to today's episode, please note, this information is for general educational purposes only and is not a recommendation to buy, hold, or sell any investment or financial product. Turpentine is an acquisition of A16Z Holdings LLC and is not a bank, investment advisor, or broker-dealer. This podcast includes paid promotional advertisements, and individuals and companies featured or advertised during this podcast are not endorsing AH Capital or any of its affiliates, including but not limited to A16Z Perennial Management LP. Similarly, Turpentine is not endorsing affiliates, individuals, or any entities featured on this podcast. All investments involve risk, including the possible loss of capital. Past performance is no guarantee of future results, and the opinions presented cannot be viewed as an indicator of future performance. Before making decisions with legal, tax, or accounting effects, you should consult appropriate professionals. Information is from sources deemed reliable on the date of publication, but Turpentine does not guarantee its accuracy. Now let's get started.
Hey,
Noah,
where are you?
I'm in San Francisco, dude. You look good and clean shaven. I gotta get on that level.
No. I like the beard, dude. I like the beard.
Thank you.
I don't know, like these glasses are making my eyes look yellow or something. I don't know.
No, I think you look good. Yeah, I'm gonna get a haircut after this. So cool, man. Well, thanks for joining. We missed last week, so we've got some good things to discuss. I wanted to start, if it sounds good with you, with another sort of trope in economics that we can debunk. We spent the last couple of weeks talking about sort of globalization and the middle class. And one that's been shared around a lot the last several years has been sort of cost disease and how it's affected service sectors, particularly healthcare, education, and housing. And sort of, there's this famous graph that you put in your blog post that has been all over Twitter, et cetera, around sort of how prices in service sectors are rising and prices in kind of, consumer products and lots of other things are falling. And it's basically meant to have this narrative of, hey, in areas where technology can sort of affect markets in an unregulated way, prices go down. But in areas where the government gets involved, it goes up. Why is that wrong or misleading or incorrect? Let's get into it.
Right. Well, so it's not necessarily wrong or misleading and correct. I mean, that is one kind of thing that happens. But, in economics, there's always like a lot of different things that happen. You kind of have, it's harder to, keep track of them all. So basically until about, let's say 2008, it was true that manufacturing productivity rose faster than service productivity. And this made sense to a lot of people because, it's easier to sort of introduce new physical technologies to manufacturing. You can put in robots, you can put in new machine tools. You can also sort of rearrange a factory floor so that you have a more efficient production process and rearrange your inputs and all this stuff, right? And so then, but services, like a nurse wheeling some old person around on a gurney or something like that, or a chair, or wheelchair, or something like that, is always going to be kind of the same technology, right? Or a teacher teaching a class to students. Some people thought, we could use MOOCs, we could use these online courses that's massive open online courses. We could use those to educate people, much more easily. But no, it turns out that you need the teacher to like be there and answer questions and all that stuff. And so just people didn't pay attention to the MOOCs and didn't really discipline themselves or learn anything. So, and of course, then Zoom University happened during the pandemic and it sucked and nobody learned anything. So that sucked. And so online education was kind of a flop and for most people. And so basically it was like, okay, so technology doesn't work for services. Okay. So the only way we're going to get cheaper services is with deregulation, so more free market oriented people said, we're going to deregulate, we're going to get cheaper services that way. And then other people said, no, we're going to bring in the government and we're going to get cheaper services that way. And then sort of a third group of people said, who cares if the services are actually cheaper to produce? What we just need are cheaper to consume. So instead we're going to just subsidize them. We're going to, the subsidies that drove up these costs, well, we're going to double down. We're going to tax the rich even more by everybody cheap healthcare, free college, and all this stuff, and free childcare. And that, yes, it's going to make it more expensive to produce, but that just means that salaries for all the care workers go up and we can hire more care workers. It's the future of work. Everybody's going to be automated away from the manufacturing jobs. So we might, and so we might as well have people do these care jobs. That's the future of the working class, will be taking care of people. And so then all we need to do is subsidize it by taxing the rich. And it was this very simple sort of idea about what needed to happen in the future. So there's sort of these three ideas: deregulate to make services cheaper, use government to make services cheaper, or use government to make services like more expensive, but subsidize them so they feel cheaper. And so those were kind of the three big ideas. And then around 2008, something weird happened, which was that manufacturing productivity absolutely flatlined. We haven't had manufacturing productivity increases in America since 2008. It's nuts. Our manufacturing just flatlined.
Why in 2008?
I don't know.
Or why did it flatline?
I don't know. And so I wrote this post about it called "Why Did Manufacturing Productivity Slow Down?" And there's a bunch of theories. One theory is it got harder to finance purchases of new equipment for manufacturing. Another theory is that there was a change in outsourcing and globalization where, sort of we before that we were getting most of our productivity increases just from outsourcing. And then after 2008, outsourcing really slowed down a lot. So the China shock was over, and the China shock may have helped our manufacturing productivity by A, driving unproductive manufacturers out of business, and B, allowing manufacturers to sort of outsource the cheap stuff to China. So we kept the valuable stuff here. So, it looked like our productivity was going way up. And so that's another, or just supply chain in general can actually drive your productivity up. So without, sort of selection effect gimmick going on. So anyway, those are some theories, and we don't really know what the heck happened. There's other possibilities too, but I guess more to the point, services productivity had been actually rising at a decent clip and accelerated a bit in like the 90s and 2000s. Service productivity accelerated, and then it accelerated again. And basically service productivity has been carrying all of our productivity growth since 2008. And our productivity growth has not been stellar, but it's been like, it's been okay. And it's been all services. It turns out you can use technology for services. It turns out that all that digital healthcare stuff we were doing actually had an effect, in terms of like maybe in education, but then especially like in healthcare stuff, in like every other service you can imagine, from like insurance to software to like consulting to everything. Technology is making a difference. IT is making a difference. We computerized everything. We internetized everything, and that made a big difference. And now we're going to use AI. That's going to improve things. I believe that's going to actually finally crack the education problem, because the one educational intervention that we know really, 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 really works for education is one-on-one tutoring. And yet before now, there was no technology for one-on-one tutoring. A teacher couldn't be in multiple places at the same time. But now with AI, you can have everybody have an AI tutor, like in the book, The Diamond Age. So have you read The Diamond Age? I forget.
I haven't read it, no, but I'm aware of the concept.
Yes, Diamond Age is great. Anyway, so then the first half of Diamond Age is great, because in the second half, Stevenson got kind of bored with the whole thing and started phoning it in, and like it just turns into some weird retelling of the Boxer Rebellion. So yeah, only read the first half. But anyway, yeah, so like so services, actually, turns out you can use technology. So it turns out that we don't really need to sort of subsidize services in order to have rising wages and falling costs in the sector.
Got it.
So that's great. That's awesome. Love that. And then, but so it sort of upends a lot of the things we know. We healthcare costs they're still going up, but they're no longer going up faster than the average costs. And in fact, they're going up a little more since the pandemic. They've been going up more slowly than other costs. So it may be that people just decided, we're done paying more for healthcare. You charged us and charged us and charged us, and guess what? I'm not paying that hospital bill. I'm letting it go to collections. So you hear all these stories about people letting their hospital bills go to collections, and hospitals getting reimbursed much less than they thought they would. That's called people don't pay, and people are just refusing to pay. And so then the actual price paid goes down. So like maybe that happened, maybe we went up from like 4% of GDP to like, whatever, like 15% of GDP or whatever, healthcare 12%. I don't remember exactly what it is. But then we said, no, done. We're not paying more. And so then college costs have actually been going down in the absolute sense. It's not just that they've been going up more slowly, it's that they've been actually going down. And so if you adjust for inflation, if you adjust for like income, measure relative to income, let's say, and then if you include financial aid, college is about as cheap as it was in 2006.
And why is it going down?
Demand. So demand for like the number of people going to college started going down. Not just the number of people, but actually the percent of young people going to college has gone down. People just are like, okay, a lot of the marginal students who were going to college but then dropping out halfway through, getting no benefit at all and getting saddled with like massive lifelong debt, are now like, wait, I shouldn't do that. Maybe I shouldn't mortgage my whole future for like, half a degree that I don't even get the full degree because I can't even handle this college course load because I just want to smoke weed. I don't, I wasn't educationally prepared. I can't handle this coursework, blah, blah, blah. And like, maybe I'll just drop out and like get an actual job. People do that. And then they're saddled with all this debt for this college they didn't complete. That's the marginal college student. Like the number of Americans who goes to college is much greater than the number of Americans who actually finishes college. So all those marginal students are dropping off, and government was sort of shoveling cheap loans to those people, and grants too, cheap loans and grants, so that those people could then hand those loans and grants to colleges. So it was just, taxpayer money getting funneled directly to colleges, which were using it for like administrators and fancy dorms. And like, I don't know, everybody always talks about like the DEI bureaucracy example. That was part of it. But like, a much bigger stuff was just like campus life, dorms, new buildings, things like that. So it's just government shoveling money to universities. That looks like it's ending, or it's going away a lot. And so people are taking out less student loans. They're onto that racket, they know, and Trump is now making pay it back again. Biden was like, we're not going to make you pay it back. Trump is like, oh, guess what? We are. Because if Trump is about one thing, it's soaking the educated class. He's like, oh, you DSA kids, you like lefty kids who were like able to pressure Biden into stopping your student loan payments. Well, guess what? That was a pause. That was not a grant. We didn't just give you the money. We just decided to temporarily stop collecting it. We're collecting it now. And so people are defaulting on the student loans at record numbers now because they're like, I didn't know I'd ever have to pay that back. And so,
but putting aside Biden and Trump, do we think it's a good economic policy to let them default, or should they pay?
No, they should pay. I mean, no, I mean, like if they default, they default. Like we can't, we don't have debtor's jail, and debtor's jail wouldn't even do anything. Like you can't just go and like send troops to people's doors and like make them fork over the cash. This isn't the mafia, dude. We're not going to send like Guido to break your kneecaps and like make you pay back the student loans.
It is a cold open.
Yeah. It's
Guido.
No, it's like we just, your credit score gets screwed. You can't buy a house. You can't get married. You can't even have a funeral. You're basically like financially screwed if you don't.
You can't even have a funeral.
You can't even have a funeral. You can't even die. You gotta sell your body to like the people who sell parts of you to somebody. Like, did you see that really like sad story about this? Like there was this young guy who died, and then like, oh man, it's dystopian. Our system's dystopian. I hate, I don't like it. But it's, so do you want to hear the story? Hold on. I don't want to laugh about this. This is not something you want to laugh about. This is horrible. I do laugh about people having to pay back their student loans. I do not laugh about sick people having to sell their bodies as cadavers. All right, I'll read it to you later. But anyway, it's really sad. But then, but people having to pay back their student loans is not sad. It is just normal. It is just like, you borrowed the money. That was a loan. It's called a loan because it's a loan. Pay it back. And so like, I understand some people can't pay it back. Like you just don't have the income. Okay. But like, there's moral hazard here. If we just tell everyone we're just going to forgive that debt, they're just going to take out more and more debt, just like, like the country of Pakistan.
Yeah.
Right. Like they just constantly take out IMF loans, but everyone knows it's not a real loan. Pakistan's never going to pay it back.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
It's an interesting time for business. Tariff and trade policies are dynamic, supply chains squeezed, and cash flow tighter than ever. If your business can't adapt in real time, you're in a world of hurt. You need total visibility, from global shipments to tariff impacts to real-time cash flow. That's NetSuite by Oracle, your AI-powered business management suite, trusted by over 41,000 businesses. NetSuite is the #1 cloud ERP for many reasons. It brings accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one suite. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. And with AI embedded throughout, you can automate a lot of those everyday tasks, letting your team stay strategic. NetSuite helps you know what's stuck, what it's costing you, and how to pivot fast. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. It's one system, full control. Tame the chaos with NetSuite. If your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, download the free ebook, Navigating Global Trade, 3 Insights for Leaders, at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays. The same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to this chart, because I look at the Mark Perry chart and I see, hospital services going up and other things going up. Like, is this chart, is there a better chart I should be looking at, or am I misreading this chart? Or
Right. Well, so first of all, that chart uses a specific measure of inflation, which is CPI,
Consumer Price Index?
Consumer Price Index. However, what am I saying? If you use PCE, you see some of these costs not going up as fast. So notice medical care services. You see that you go down to, you see hospital services going up, but you look at overall medical care and you see that it has been growing a lot more slowly and now actually going down since the pandemic. If you measured relative to wages, so notice you go down to average hourly wages and see that average hourly wages have grown, and they have, they're in the red, and they've grown at an accelerating rate recently. So if you measure all these things relative to wages to actually look at affordability, you see even slower growth and actual decrease on some of these things. So you notice how college tuition and fees has leveled off as well. If you use PCE, it'll level off more, but none of those take into account student loans. Or not student loans, I'm sorry, grants, scholarships, free money, which is not student loans at all. It's just grants, it's free money. It's like Pell Grants and scholarships and need-based financial aid from Stanford, whatever, right? Like they give you need-based financial aid. And so that, if you count all that stuff, it hasn't been going up since like 2006. So basically, this chart looks like it shows a worse situation than actually exists for college tuition and healthcare. So this is actually not the chart we want to be looking at, because it doesn't include financial aid. It uses CPI instead of PCE, where if you go longer than like 5 years or something, like PCE is much better.
And why is, or how should we think about the differences between PCE and CPI?
Oh, so PCE, most importantly, it measures substitution. So like if there's more expensive types of a thing and less expensive types of a thing, and people start using the cheaper one, PCE will try to measure like what you actually paid for the thing, while also doing a quality adjustment, right? Because if it's cheaper because it sucks, you don't want that distorting your measure. But then CPI will just say like, okay, suppose you were buying this one particular kind of thing, got more expensive, and you didn't substitute away from it, you just ponied up all the cash.
Yep.
That's what CPI does. So then CPI doesn't measure substitution like that. So PCE is supposed to measure stuff over a longer period of time. So if you look at many years out, you want to use PCE, I guess. There's another form of CPI that tries to correct for this called CPI-RUS, but nobody uses it on these graphs. They just use your standard CPI. It's easier. But if you look at like my graphs that I show you down below, it shows that like healthcare prices have been growing more slowly than other prices since like 2009. Right? So that's a decade and a half. Healthcare prices have been growing more slowly than price on average if you use PCE, and then have been getting more affordable since about 2012 relative to wages. So, and then college has been getting, even if you just look at headline tuition, you don't even look at scholarships and grants, you see that since the pandemic, like tuition's basically crashing. And then if you look at net cost of attendance, because you include all the scholarships and stuff, then you see that, like, for example, private nonprofit four-year universities like the Harvards of the world, those are cheaper than they were in 2006. That's crazy. Like, actually cheaper. I'm not even saying relative to income. I'm just saying like out and out cheaper. Like, that's just, and so that's pretty cool. Like, so I'm not saying this reversed all that cost run up, but I'm saying that, like, it stopped, right?
And largely because of technology.
I mean, I think it's technology, but it's also demand, right? It's like when we stopped agreeing to pay more for these things, people just stopped charging us more for these things. The power's in your hands, the power of demand, like, you're just like, no, I'm not going to pay you for this. And they're like, oh, I guess I can't charge you for this because they don't have Guido either. They don't have the baseball bats. They can't charge you. And, like, for people like you and me, the decision to go to college, like, obviously there's Teal fellows, right? They did fine. So but, like, the decision to go to college, you probably want to go to college if you're, like, sort of upper class people. I didn't grow up, I grew up middle class. I didn't grow up upper class, but, like, certainly if you want to be in the upper class, it's probably a good idea to go to college. But if you're going to become a plumber, you don't need to go to college. And so, like, the people who waste all this money on 2 years of college, then drop out and pay back all these student loan debt, for them, the marginal student, go be a plumber, right? A plumber makes like 80K a year. I don't know. They'll make like that's more than median person. That's like twice the median personal income of the United States to make 80K a year. And then it's a decent job, good job security, pretty much. Robots are not going to plumb anytime soon. They're going to take your coding job, but they won't take your plumbing job. So learn to plumb, losers. I don't know. So yeah. So like, for a lot of people, college didn't make sense on the margin.
Right. And so, okay, Trump apparently did some price controls with some drugs or pharma the other week. Can we talk about how we think about the pros and cons of that? I heard someone say the argument of something like, "Hey, it doesn't make sense that Ozempic costs like $90 in Europe, but like $800 here or something." Like, it seems we do a lot of subsidizing of sort of drugs globally. Or
If you look at what Americans pay on average for their pharmaceuticals, we get cheaper prices than people in other rich countries. That blows a lot of people's brains. But the reason is because of generics. So America has more expensive drugs when they first come out and cheaper drugs after they become generic. So if you're going to buy just like Tylenol or whatever over the counter, it's going to be cheaper here. And that's most of what people consume is generic, right? So most of it is not, even prescription. People prescribe generic stuff. And so most of the drugs people consume in America are generic. So we actually pay less than people in other countries overall. We pay more for new drugs. And that is because we're doing the research for those things. And the question is, are we subsidizing other countries? To some degree, yes, we're subsidizing other countries because we're doing this research and then we're not recouping our costs fully from them. But not other rich countries. The countries we're subsidizing are like Africa. Okay? We're subsidizing poor countries. And so what Trump didn't say you must cut prices in America. He actually didn't do try to do price control by fiat, right? Biden was thinking of trying to do that. Trump actually isn't trying to do that yet. What Trump is saying is you have to equalize the price. So you can't charge Africa a lower price. So then companies can do one of two things. They can charge America a lower price to keep their Africa sales, or they can charge Africa a higher price and lose most of their Africa sales so they can keep getting their America sales. Which do you think they'll do? Which would you do? Would you raise prices on the Africans or would you cut prices on the Americans if you had to follow this order?
you'd raise prices on the Americans?
On the Africans.
Right. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, you'd raise prices on the Africans. And then most of the Africans would be like, well, I can't buy this drug. So I guess I'm going to get AIDS now. And then, I guess since life is short, life is cheap, I'm going to have 20 more kids. What's interesting, by the way, there's a whole nother episode we could do about how, like, if you want to make African overpopulation worse, what you do is you cut USAID and you cut PEPFAR.
Yeah, we alluded to that earlier, but yeah, I hear you.
So you're going to make a big baby boom in Africa. I guess they can move to Europe. I guess migration, that's the solution. But I don't think that the rightists want that to happen. But anyway, more to the point, you're going to screw over a lot of African people. And actually, there's been this really spectacular debate between Tyler Cowen and Scott Alexander. Have you been following that one about USAID?
Let's talk about it. What is the debate?
Oh, so I actually, I haven't weighed in here because I'm really not an expert. Like, I don't know that much about foreign aid, so I'm kind of consuming the whole idea now. They're arguing about whether USAID is good, right? Tyler's saying, I've done lots of this granting charity stuff. Like, I know USAID's not efficient. And Scott Alexander saying, well, They're not perfectly efficient, but they save like a lot of lives. And by canceling USAID, we're literally murdering all these people. Because he's like an EA, right? He's an effective altruist. Tyler Cowen, not so much. Tyler Cowen is concerned with efficiency and moral hazard and all these things like that. And so Scott is just he says this has been a general pattern of debates with Tyler. I will criticize some very specific point he made, and he'll challenge whether I am important enough to have standing to debate him. Oh, have you been to 570 different countries? Have you eaten a burrito prepared by an Ethiopian camel farmer with under-recognized talent? Have you read 800 million books, then made a post about each one consisting of a randomly selected paragraph, followed by the words, "This really makes you think," for those of you paying attention?
That's a pretty good Tyler diss.
Yeah, obviously there's something to be said for having worked in the field and having on the ground knowledge of things, but there's also something to be said for actually looking at the numbers and, like saying, well, actually, okay, their overhead isn't really that high. Neither one will get you the full answer, and both together won't even get you the full answer, but like you should look at both. And like I agree with Tyler that canceling aid is not murder. Otherwise, all the aid we're not currently yet doing is also murder. So we're just genociding the whole world right now. Like, that's not how morality works. I'm sorry. Like sins of commission and sins of omission are different. If I shoot 1 million people, everybody recognizes that's morally different than failing to give up all my money, which could save 1 million people. All right. So Scott, sorry, EA is a little overzealous on this. I'm an opponent of statistical consequentialism. On the other hand, Tyler is being too much of a grump and like letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. So I think Scott is right about that.
Yeah, fascinating. And just while we're on random beefs, how would you summarize the Scott Alexander and Curtis Yarvin beef? Is Scott Alexander basically saying that Curtis, had all these sort of beliefs about criticizing democracy and effective sort of governance via the form of sort of leader who could sort of get things done, and the fact that he's sort of thrown in his lot with Trump to some degree shows that he's compromised those very values, or what's sort of the argument?
Okay. Oh, so I did actually follow this one a little bit. What happened is this: there is always a tension between effectiveness and checks and balances in any government. Democracy is simply one kind of check and balance. It's you can vote people out. And the argument for dictatorship has always been dictators get things done. And the argument for democracy has been, yeah, well, dictators get dumb shit done, so you need to throw the bastards out. This argument will never be resolved because there are times when you need a stronger leader and there are times when you need a less strong leader. And so, for example, America, during times of absolute crisis, has gotten leaders who were widely called dictators and who assumed some quasi-dictatorial powers. The examples being the Civil War and World War II.
Washington, Lincoln, FDR. Yeah.
Yes. And so in those examples, Lincoln and FDR did some quasi-dictatorial things. And some of these were really bad, like the Japanese internment. Very bad quasi-dictatorial thing that happened. They didn't eliminate checks and balances. Like FDR and Lincoln were not actual dictators, but they were stronger presidents, and they simply assumed power, more power to the presidency during a time of crisis. And everyone sort of gave them leeway to do that because they agreed that this is a big deal. Woodrow Wilson also did this when we didn't need it. Okay, World War I, we came in at the very end. We didn't spend that much effort on it, and it was kind of over quick. We didn't actually need to do, and Woodrow Wilson did more dictatorial stuff than FDR. Woodrow Wilson assumed personal control over the entire media in the United States. And the Supreme Court later said, no, you can't do that. And he's like, okay, war's done. I'm not going to do that anymore. But Woodrow Wilson personally suppressed all news coverage of the Spanish flu. Then got the Spanish flu and was brain damaged by it. Anyway, thus leading to Hitler. But anyway, that's another story. But then that was extremely dictatorial. We didn't need to do it. But those are the 3 times when we've done it. 2 times that I think people would agree were kind of worked out. Despite some mistakes, things worked out. But then I think that then in World War I, we didn't need to do it, and it just like made us shittier for a little while. There's this book called American Midnight, which is about that. It's pretty good. Anyway,
back to the beef. Okay, so how does this relate to?
Yeah, the beef. So basically, a bunch of people were like, damn it, our government can't get anything done. I wish our government could get things done. I wish we had a dictator. But you can't just say that in like 2006. You can't say, I wish we had a dictator, because dictatorship is bad. And so Curtis Yarvin comes in and says these extremely abstruse thought experiments, which say we could have a dictator if we did blah, blah, X, Y, Z. And Scott Alexander's like, I'm a hyper nerd who takes everything at face value and assumes everyone is arguing in good faith. I will believe you and say, oh, this is really interesting. Let me think intellectually about dictatorship instead of just thinking, oh, here's a guy who likes dictators. He sucks. Like, so then that's what a lot of people's reaction to Moldbug was. But some people's reaction was, oh, this guy likes dictators. He's great. I like dictators too. But now I have an excuse to say it. But then Scott Alexander like really takes it seriously. He's like, let me think about this corporate state and how these hypothetical rules that no one will ever implement will work, And so Yarvin's doing this thing. And then later Trump comes in. And by this time, Yarvin's old. He's said most of his big ideas. He's gotten, Yarvin is like the toast of the town, and like the Red Scare people are inviting him to parties in Dime Square. And so then he's basically at this point, he's a culture warrior. At this point, he stops really caring, I think, about whether we have a dictator or not, or whether our government gets things done. He cares more about culture wars. He's like the left, the wokes, And by the way, you're on the right if you use the term the left. Because if you're on the left, you recognize huge differences within the left. But if you're on the right, you see, like Pete Buttigieg and like, the like Chapo Trap House guys as the same guys. That's all. You're all the left. You're all the left. And so like you doing that. So then, so basically at this point, Yarvin says in a roundabout way, why are you worried about Trump? The wokes are so much more powerful. The left is so much more powerful. Trump and his people are not that effective, but yet they're our best hope for pushing back on woke culture. They're our only hope. And they're not that scary guys, and they're just going to push back as best they can. So let's not try to give them a hard time over the fact that they're acting a little bit dictatorially. So I think that that's what Yarvin basically said in his rebuttal. And then Hanania comes in. By the way, did you see today's humor on Twitter?
About the young men cancel
Explore page.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's hilarious.
That's anyway. So then Hanania comes in and he's like, okay, fine. But like a lot of the factual things that Moldbug says, that Yarvin says, are wrong. And he's like, here's how you're wrong. You're wrong. This isn't how it happened. This isn't how it happened. You're just making up history. It didn't happen this way. And like Hanania is right. And like Yarvin is just, because Yarvin has become a culture warrior in his old age, all Yarvin thinks is just like woke versus anti-woke. He's like stuck in a perpetual 2020. And honestly, I have worked very, very hard to not be stuck in 2020 myself and my own thinking. And I know it's a trap, and I see lots of people falling into the trap. It's like the summer of Floyd, summer of Floyd through January 6th. Okay. That arc, that interregnum, that 6-month period of the world, or 8-month period of the world, let's say, that defines the rest of your life. That was your life. Just like for Hunter S. Thompson, that couple of years that he spent in San Francisco doing a bunch of drugs and getting laid with all the hippie chicks defined his life. And then in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he's looking back at it and he's being like, you can, with the right kind of eyes, you can just see the point where the wave broke and rolled back. Have you ever seen that? Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? His famous speech. And so he, like, that was his life. That was you, bro. And like, I knew this guy who was a grad student in like the 2000s, and he was writing this like sad emo songs about how the rave scene of the 90s was gone and how it'll never come back, and that was a peak that will never be exceeded. And I'm like, bro, there's other things to do. Like, the future moves on. Do not be trapped. And I feel that all the culture warriors are trapped in the period of time between like May 2020 and January 2021, when like it was like race wars on, boys, like it's this is it. It wasn't. Okay. It was a bunch of people who were mad about lockdown, who were like taking the opportunity to protest against racism, and then a bunch of like good little libs who got scared of that and so put equity in all their stuff. And then it was, then a bunch of like beer swilling Gen X middle-aged conservative types who got very panicked about that and charged at Congress, not really knowing what they wanted to do. That's what happened. It was very dumb. On all sides, it was dumb. And then, and it passed. It passed. It's over. Get over it, guys. Like, it's not just going to be like woke versus based forever. Like, can we not have that be the culture of America forever? Please, God. I'm out here blaspheming. Sorry, God. All of our Catholic listeners will be angry at me. Sorry, Catholic friends. I blasphemed. And I'm just saying, like, no, I want God to intercede and intervene and make it so that we can, as a country, we can get past this. I feel like the last time this happened was the 60s, right? All these people never got past the 60s. There's a whole genre of boomer movies about how boomers never got past the 60s. There's The Big Chill. There's Field of Dreams. There's all this thing about like how those like couple years you spent like doing sit-ins and like anti-Vietnam War protests and smoking weed and getting laid with the hippie chicks and hippie guys, how that defined this generation. Will never move past it. You know, like, I don't want 2020 to be that for me. I don't want the fucking pandemic to be my Vietnam War. Please.
You don't want to be stuck in it. Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck in it. I feel that like Yarvin's become stuck in it, and that's why he can only see like, you know, woke versus based. Like that he can like whatever sort of, you know, interesting sort of nerdy thought that he put into this idea of how could we justify having a dictator in the 2000s, even though I disagree with it. And I think none of those things would ever happen. And it was all just a thought exercise to justify coming down harder on the dictatorship side of things. Even though I think that, you know, he was smart, he was interesting. And this is what Scott is saying. And Scott's right. Like, Scott's right because Scott only aims for the truth. But Scott is a truth-seeking guy. Scott just wants to think about the facts. And in that sense, I am like Scott. I just want to think about the facts. I am stubbornly, contrarily, you know, self-defeatingly wedded to this idea of just figuring out what the hell's going on in this world. I think Scott is too. And that's why he's frustrated, because he sees, you know, he didn't say it in so many words, but what he really means is that I think, and what he's seeing anyway, what he's picking up on is that Yarvin's become just one more Gen X culture war, you know, old guy. And I don't want to be that old. I want to move past it. I got a little youth left in this tank yet, you know.
Cool. Thanks for updating me on the beef. I haven't fully caught up yet. I will at some point, and maybe we'll do a deeper dive, because I think I think you know, Curtis has, and we were sort of DMing about this a little bit, you know, Curtis has influenced a lot of people, and I think it's worth sort of, you know, tracing that lineage kind of.
That's right. I think that when he was writing stuff, you know, I read him up until about like 2009, I think. And then, you know, when and then we had a very long email correspondence during like 2014, 2015. And I've hung out with him a couple times, like, and then there's a lot he doesn't know about economics.
No, we're at time. We'll save this for a deeper conversation, but this was a great tour of a few different topics that you've heard about, and we'll get to it again soon. As always, until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.